Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished entrepreneur and an author from London, UK, Mr. Simon Alexander Ong. Simon, welcome to the show.
Ashutosh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Simon is a personal development entrepreneur. He's a coach and a public speaker. He's a best-selling author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's a best-selling author of a book titled Energize, and we're going to talk about his book. So, Simon, before we start talking about Energize and coaching, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Sure. So I grew up here in the United Kingdom to two Malaysian Chinese parents who had emigrated here for a better life. And as I grew up, it was a very stereotypical household in the sense that it was all about getting good grades, get to a good university, and get a good job.
Yeah.
And so when I graduated in the middle of 2007, I began my career in the financial services sector at what was probably the worst possible time to begin, because this was a year before the global financial crisis of 2008. And the company that I started with was Lehman Brothers.
Wow.
Which collapsed into administration 14 months after I joined.
Correct.
So for anybody who has gone through redundancy or where their job is at risk, they can probably relate to what I was going through at the time. But when I look back, Ashutosh, I think that the experience was an absolute blessing in disguise, because it kickstarted for me the process of me arriving at where I am today. So I started to ask myself, well, as long as I worked for someone, then I would have a lot of my destiny out of my control. But if I could work for myself, maybe I could have more control over where things led. And that led me to what I now get to do today, which is to coach executives, entrepreneurs, celebrities, speak on some of the biggest stages and companies across the world. And in 2020, when the world was going into lockdown, and I became a father for the first time, I had the opportunity to write my first book with Penguin, which was released in 2022. And it had some fantastic endorsements from the likes of New York Times bestselling authors Simon Sinek, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, and Marie Forleo.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you for sharing. And, you know, one similarity you and I have is that my first book was also done by Penguin. So that was in 2010. So, Simon, let's talk a little bit about your book, Energize. I'm assuming it's available on Amazon?
Yes, it should be available on Amazon in all regions.
Okay, so I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Simon Alexander Ong's book, Energize. I'm going to do the same. So, Simon, tell me a little bit about your book and what was your hypothesis when you wrote the book?
Sure. So when I reflected on my career, Ashutosh, I remember there was a point in the second job I had after Lehman Brothers collapsed. So when Lehman Brothers collapsed, I ended up working in a hedge fund. And in this job, I experienced burnout. I had just come off the back of a career where now the future was not so certain, because we had a lot of volatility. Even if you got a job, the question was, how long could you keep it? And I had this feeling of being lost. I was drained mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And when I reflect on how I got from that point to where I am today, I realized it was because I started to focus on elevating my own energetic state. And that began with physical energy.
Correct.
Because when I was in that job, I got little sleep, I did not eat well, and I did not move my body very often. So that became the first aspect of energy that I had to address. And as I started to address that, I realized that that was the foundation of a good life. Because if you put it this way, to the healthy individual, they will have many hopes, dreams, and goals.
Correct.
But to the sick, they have only one. And I realized at that point that if you don't have good health, you can't do much else. And for me, it was about stopping making our health a side hustle. And so when I made it a priority, beautiful things started to happen. I was then able to focus on my mental energy, my emotional energy, and my spiritual energy. Now, what I mean by these other three dimensions, mental energy is all about our mindset.
Correct.
It is also about our ability to focus in a world that is getting noisier and noisier. And also our ability to access our creative energy. We are all born creative individuals. If you don't believe me, just look at any child. A child is full of creativity, but we tend to lose that as we grow older.
Yep.
Emotional energy is all about how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we respond in times of uncertainty. And then spiritual energy is all about purpose and fulfillment. When you are low on spiritual energy, you might feel a bit of tension inside of you. And that is because the work that you're doing is not in alignment to who you are. Whereas when you are high on spiritual energy, the work that you're doing is an extension of your true self. And that is why what I began to observe, Ashutosh, as I built my entrepreneurial journey, what I began to observe is that many of us, we are not exhausted because we're physically doing too much, but because we are doing too little of the things that bring us joy, and because we are often running someone else's race. And I believe that once we begin to understand what success means to us, when we are clear on that definition, we begin to awaken the greatest source of energy there is.
Wow, what a great response. Thank you. So, when I was reading about you, there were a couple of interesting phrases that stood out. And the first one that I want to ask you about is the art and science of energy management. Now, energy management, I'm assuming, is our own energy, but is it an art? Is it a science, or is it both?
I think there are elements of both. And when I think about energy, it's actually something we all know, but we are not entirely clear on how to manage our own energy. So if you practice yoga, you might call it prana. If you are from the Maori culture, you might call it mana. If you are a fan of the Star Wars film franchise, you might call it the Force. Now, whatever term we use to describe it, we are all talking about the same thing, which is energy as a life force. Now, the reason I say there's an art and a science to it is because when many of us think about productivity, we tend to think time management. I have to manage my time better when it comes to productivity. But the drawback of that is that if you exclusively focus on time management without considering energy management, you're not going to be productive at all in the long term. Because focusing only on time management assumes that your energy is constant throughout the entire day. In reality, it is not. Some of us are early risers, some of us are night owls, some of us have less energy in the afternoon, some of us have more energy in the afternoon.
Correct.
And so I think that the art part of it is really raising our awareness of our own energetic rhythm. And we all have different energetic rhythms.
Correct.
I often say that you cannot have self-development without self-awareness, because you cannot change what you're not aware of. And so often when I work with clients or I speak to organizations, one of the first things I get them to do is an energy audit. Right now, what is your energy levels like? And what is your energy like throughout the day? Once we begin to understand that information, we can then use that so that we're working with our body and not against it. So that's some of the art side. The science part are the tools. What are the tools that we can then use in order to manage our energy better? And this touches on those 4 dimensions I shared earlier. So when I think about energy, I see it through 4 dimensions. Physical energy is all about getting sufficient rest, eating well, and moving your body. Mental energy is how can you design an environment around you that makes it impossible not to succeed and allows your creativity to thrive. Emotional energy is how can you better understand yourself at a deeper level? Because only when you understand yourself can you access true wisdom. And it is why one of the best activities I recommend those in leadership positions is journaling. Journaling is a very powerful activity to better know yourself. And as one lady said, who I interviewed for my book, Diana Chow, she said that writing is humanity distilled into ink. And then for spiritual energy, one of the ways that we can better align ourselves to who we truly are is to simply ask ourselves 2 questions. Number 1, what does success mean to you? And number 2, what sort of impact do you want to have in the world? And the second question is important because our value as humans is determined by how much more we have given to the world than we have taken from it.
Well said, well said. And your response on some people are morning people and some people are night people, and you spoke about the energy audit also. How does one identify which is the most productive time of day for each one of us?
Sure. So it can be something as simple as tracking your energy for a period of a few weeks. So let's say we split the day into early morning, late morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, and evening. At different points throughout the day, just jot down on a scale of 0 to 10 how energized you feel. And that will start to give you some insight as to what your average energy rhythm is like throughout a given week. The next part is to then listen to your body. That will give you a first step, if you will, to understand at what points of the day am I most energized, at which points of the day am I not so energized. And then the art part is just being able to listen to what your body is telling us. Whether we realize it or not, our body is always speaking to us.
Correct.
Either it's saying to you, you need to rest more, you need to work less hard, or it might say, you need to make sure you got more blocks in your diary with just me time. Our body is always speaking to us. Now, if we don't listen to our body, it can speak to us very violently through the form of illness, through the form of burnout, through the form of collapse. Now, that's an extreme, but that's what happens. The body's trying to tell us something that is useful for us to move forward with more energy.
Very interesting. You also state that slowing down can actually help us to speed up. How does this happen?
Sure. Well, first of all, the way I see it is that in a world that is only getting faster, Ashutosh, slowing down is a superpower. And the reason why slowing down is a superpower, but it also allows us to speed up, is because many of us are out there collecting dots. We are busy, we are listening to something, we are watching something, we're always in the process of doing something. Many of us are busy. But how often do we have the space to connect those dots? As I often say, there's no point collecting all of those dots if you don't give yourself the time to connect the dots. And if you go back in history, what we notice is that it is in those moments of disconnection that we actually have our greatest insights. And this is the part of speeding up. So whether it is Isaac Newton, the apple falls on his head and gravity is discovered, or Archimedes, Eureka, sitting in the bathtub and displacement theory is discovered, or Thomas Edison fishing but with no bait, so nobody, not even the fish, would disturb him. All of these stories, whether they are true or not, tell us that when we slow down, we get creative insights, but we also get more connected to that wisdom that is inside of us all. As many meditation teachers would say, silence is far from empty. It is full of the wisdom and the insights that we seek. But how many of us are comfortable in silence? How many of us are comfortable to slow down? With the clients I work with, what I notice is that it tends to be the most ambitious leaders who find it difficult to slow down, because we have grown up with this belief that we are productive when we're doing something, and when we're not doing something, we're unproductive or we're lazy. But actually, it's important to spend as much time being as we do doing.
And your response gives me, and that's the segue to my next question, which is that a lot of us are also constantly worried about what can we say to the other person, what will the other person think, and if we slow down, what will the response be? So my question is, how can we set up boundaries with people and time?
I would say, before we can even think about boundaries with other people, Ashutosh, we must understand what is important for us. What are we working towards? What are our goals? What is our aspirations? What is our vision? Because if you don't have clarity on that, you don't know what the boundaries are that you want to place to help you move forward.
Correct.
Now, once you've got clarity on that, the way to then create boundaries is to communicate them. Often we don't communicate our boundaries and we expect other people to know them. So one of the questions I often share when I work with those within companies, but also those who run their own business, is we can be quick to click yes on that calendar invite for a meeting. We can be quick to click yes on that social event. And we can block out time to sort out our holidays. But how often do we block out time in our diaries just for us, i.e. me time? When was the last time we blocked out time in our diary just for ourselves?
Correct.
And I think that if we start to block out that time and stick to that, often when we do block it and something comes in our diary, we sacrifice that me time just to get the other thing done.
Absolutely.
But if we can have discipline around it and treat it as if it was a real meeting, what happens is we start to create boundaries. And I think that it helps us in terms of our energy. You know, just like our electronic devices, they have to be recharged. We as humans, we also have to recharge ourselves. Otherwise, we are just surviving every single week rather than thriving.
Fascinating. So, Simon, let's now talk a little bit about coaching. You know, and I'm sure you coach a lot of people. My first question to you is, given such an amazing background that you come from, such a rich background, how has your background supported your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
I would say the biggest impact on my style and the way that I coach, Ashutosh, is an experience that occurred when I was 17. So when I was 17, I unfortunately lost my mum to a tragic accident. And when that occurs, as you can imagine, it matures you overnight.
Correct.
And it changes your perspective on life. And so one of the things I learned from my mum when I was younger, so she was a nurse, she worked in the medical field, is the importance of kindness and empathy. And so when I coach other people, even though I would challenge my clients, I would challenge them in a way that is kind and empathetic. Because what I've realized is that every single human that we engage with has their own personal challenges that we may not be aware of. We probably won't even know anything about, because they will often guard them in mind. And so we do have to approach things with a level of empathy and kindness in order to create that space that is trusting.
Correct.
So that they can share what is on their mind. Because only when they trust the person they're sharing their insights with can you really begin to explore the next steps.
Well said. My next question to you is, you know, that all of us have people in our lives who have been influencers for us or who have shaped us. And therefore, my question is that how have you been shaped by some people? And how are they influencing you as a coach today?
Well, because I read and learn so much every single day, Ashutosh, I am constantly being influenced by so many people, whether that is speakers, authors, coaches, mentors. So I see it as going to like a buffet at a restaurant. You know, when you and your friends go to pick up your plate of food, when you come back and sit at the table, you will all have a different looking plate.
Correct.
And what you put on your plate and the portion size that you put on your plate will be very different.
Correct.
And so that's the purpose of influence that I see, is that when we are influenced by people, the real goal is not to follow someone else's influence per se, but to take their influences as parts of a recipe to create your own way of living. And so when I look at my career, countless influences, whether it's Tony Robbins, who has influenced the way that I coach, or whether it's Simon Sinek that has influenced the way I speak, or whether it is a podcast that expresses the importance of vulnerability. So I'm always learning lots of different things, and then I see what resonates. How can I explore this area a bit more? And how can I integrate it in the way that I live? Because ultimately, these influences are really guides, if you will, towards finding our own way of living.
Thank you. My next question, Simon, is on culture. And you live in a very, very culturally diverse country. And you have your origins from Asia, which is again very culturally different. And I'm sure you work with many clients from different cultures. My question is, how does culture impact coaching?
I think culture can impact coaching. Also, I guess, speaking, because I do a lot of speaking, so culture can also impact speaking in terms of the stories that we share. Culture can also impact coaching, I guess, from the sense of wanting to understand others. Because I grew up in a country where I was a minority, and there wasn't many Chinese around me when I was young. I mean, now there are lots of different cultures and backgrounds in society today. But when I was growing up, I was very much a minority. And I think that desire to want to understand my environment, that desire to want to understand a different way of living and culture, allowed me to ask lots of questions. And the basis of good coaching is asking good questions.
Correct.
And so the desire to really want to know about what's going on in someone's mind, the desire to be curious about people's thoughts, I think that comes from being someone who wasn't typically British, but came from an Asian background, wanting to understand the world that he was in. And so I think that has certainly helped me in terms of the questions that I ask my clients to understand their world.
I have time for two more questions. My next question is about the young leaders, the millennials and the Gen Zs. And given the fact that you started work in 2007, you're probably a millennial yourself. But, you know, I've often said, and I'm from the boomers generation, I've often said millennials and Gen Zs have brought a breath of fresh air into our organizations, you know, new perspectives, new way of thinking, new way of protecting our planet, which people of my generation seems to have destroyed very, very effectively. My question is, as a coach, what are your perspectives on the areas these young leaders need to be coached in?
Good question, Ashutosh. First of all, I think that every client is different, but if I were looking at a high level, millennials and Gen Z, I think the area they probably need to be coached in the most, from my experience, is understanding how to sell an idea. Because if there's anything that I've learned through my own journey, is that you might have a great idea, a great product, or a fantastic service, but if you can't communicate it in a way that engages people, then what happens is they don't want anything to do with you.
Correct.
And so you might believe in a cause, you might believe in an idea that the world has to embrace in order to affect positively the future of our planet. But if you cannot communicate it in a way that engages people, then guess what? You're going to turn people away.
Right.
And so the ability to communicate, and I think this goes back to something Warren Buffett also said when he was asked what is the most important business skill that we can focus on, he also said communication. So I would say understanding how to communicate in all of its different forms, whether it's video, content, writing, speaking. If you can understand the power of effective communication, then you will be able to move and change the world.
Well said. And my last question to you, Simon, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own journey and your learnings as an author and as a coach, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your journey and from our conversation?
Sure. I think the first lesson I would share is that knowledge is only potential power. The real magic lies in the application of that knowledge. When I've looked at some of the most successful individuals across the planet, what I've realized is that they have a bias towards action. And if we want to make real progress forward, it is important for us to collapse that gap between idea and execution.
Correct.
That would be the first lesson. The second is, as challenging as it may be, it is to trust your own heart and intuition more than the opinions of others. Because if you can do so, you will begin to progress and move forward at a much faster way. And it will feel a lot freer. You will feel a lot freer. The third lesson is gratitude. Now, I mean gratitude in a very visceral way. Because when I had my child in April 2020, I was reminded of the fact that when you are born, that is a miracle event.
Correct.
I mean, just think about it for a moment. The odds of you being born, the odds of your parents deciding to have you, the odds of your parents being able to give birth.
Correct.
The odds of your great-great-grandparents and your great-great-great-grandparents surviving multiple pandemics and world wars. The fact that you are representation of the fact that the link since the dawn of civilization in your family tree is unbroken.
Correct.
Many wish that they would win the national or regional jackpot in the lottery.
Absolutely.
But we are already holding the greatest lottery ticket there is, which is the lottery of life.
Correct.
And so the final question to leave the viewers with is, what are you going to do with that winning ticket? Because when you understand just how short life is, and you are grateful for the fact that you are living, you begin to make very different choices.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And on that note, and your amazing lessons, first one you said is knowledge is potential power, real power is in the application of the knowledge. Second you said was trust your heart more than the opinions of others. And third you said it's so important to be able to understand and practice gratitude. And you're asking everyone a question, what will you do with your winning ticket? Thank you, Simon, for speaking to me about your amazing journey. Thank you for telling me about how you started from the epicenter of the world in chaos in 2007 as an employee of Lehman and how well you have come out of it. Thank you for talking to me about your book, Energize. Thank you also for speaking to me about coaching. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.